Can I start now, Prabhu, or I should wait?
You can start, Mataji.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna devotees. Today we will be discussing Srimad Bhagavatam 3.1.3 and 3.1.4. So let's get started. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So let's get started from the verse Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 1 and verse number 3. We have two verses today, but we'll get started with verse number 3 first. Rajovacha Kutra Shatur Bhagavata Maitri Yanas Sanghama Kadava Saha Samvada Etat Varnayana Prabho. Rajovacha Kutra Shatur Bhagavata Maitri Yanas Sanghama Kadava Saha Samvada Etat Varnaya Na Prabhu. Synonyms. Rajovacha, the king said. Kutra, wherein. Shatuhu, with Vidura, Bhagavata, and with his grace. Maitrena, with Maitreya, as there was. Sanghama, meeting. Kada, when. Va, also. Saha, with. Samvada, discussion. Etat, this. Varnaya, describe. Na, unto me. Prabhu, O my Lord. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. The king asked Sukadev Goswami, where and when did the meeting and discussion take place between Saint Vidura and His Grace Maitreya Muni? Kindly oblige, my Lord, and describe this to us. Purport. Exactly as Shaunaka Rishi inquired of Suta Goswami, and Suta Goswami replied, so Srila Sukadev Goswami replied to King Parikshit's inquiries. The king was very anxious to understand the meaningful discussion that took place between the two great souls. And now we'll go on to the next verse because this was a short verse. So we have Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 1st chapter, and verse number 4 also. So read the verse. Nahi alparthodayastasya vidhur syamalatmanaha tasmin variyasi prashanaha sadhuvado pabramhitaha. So once more, nahi alparthodayastasya vidhur syamalat manaha tasmin variyasi prashna sadhuvado parbramhita. And the synonyms are na, never, he, certainly, alpa artha, small, unimportant purpose, udaya, raised, tasya, his, vidurasya, of Vidura, amala atmana, of the saintly man, tasmin, in that, variyasi, highly purposeful, prashanaha, question, sadhuvada, things approved by saints and sages, upabhramita, full with. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Saint Vidura was a great and pure devotee of the Lord, and therefore his questions to His Grace Rishi Maitreya must have been very purposeful, on the highest level, and approved by learned circles. Purport. Questions and answers among different classes of men have different values. Inquiries by mercantile men in a business exchange cannot be expected to be highly purposeful in spiritual values. Questions and answers by different classes of men can be guessed by the caliber of the persons concerned. In Bhagavad Gita, the discussion was between Lord Sri Krishna and Arjuna, the Supreme Person and the Supreme Devotee, respectively. The Lord admitted Arjuna to be his devotee and friend, Bhagavad Gita 4.3, and therefore any sane man can guess that the discussion was on the topic of Bhakti Yoga system. Actually, the whole Bhagavad Gita is based on the principle of Bhakti Yoga. There is a difference between karma and karma yoga. Karma is regulated action for enjoyment of the fruit by the performer, but karma yoga is action performed by the devotee for the satisfaction of the Lord. Karma yoga is based on bhakti or pleasing the Lord, whereas karma is based on pleasing the senses of the performer himself. According to Srimad Bhagavatam, one is advised to approach a bona fide spiritual master when one is actually inclined to question from an elevated level of spiritual understanding. A common man who has no interest in spiritual values has no need to approach a spiritual master just as a matter of following fashion. As a student, Maharaj Parikshit was serious about learning the science of God, and Sukadev Goswami was a bona fide spiritual master in the transcendental science. Both of them knew that the topics discussed by Vidura and Rishi Maitreya were elevated, and thus Maharaj Parikshit was very interested in learning from the bona fide spiritual master. So let's get started. Om Ajnanatimmirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Badadati Swapadantikam Vanchakalpatarubhishcha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we have two verses. And the first verse, actually, it's mostly a dialogue between Parikshit Maharaj and Sukadev Goswami, two very elevated personalities. And the dialogue is that Parikshit Maharaj is asking Sukadev Goswami that where did the meeting and discussion take place between Saint Vidura and Maitreya Muni, and so he's just inquisitive and interested in knowing that, you know, where and when did it take place. Two things he wanted to start off with. So before we get started, you know, just wanted to give a little bit of a background, or rather a reminder background regarding Saint Vidura and His Grace Maitreya Muni. Both of them are really, you know, great souls and very elevated personalities in in Srimad Bhagavatam. And Vidura, as we know, that he was actually born to Vyasdeva, and you know, he was also the son of a maidservant. But he was a very wise character in Mahabharata, if you go to see. And so his wisdom in the Mahabharata is second only to Krishna's, actually. And so whenever the Pandavas used to take counsel from, you know, mainly from Krishna, but if at all they took counsel from anybody else, it was really Vidura, because Vidura was very, very highly, a very wise man. And, you know, main thing was that he advised Dhritarashtra a number of times in Mahabharata, and all his conversations have been recorded, like in Vidura Niti, which is actually a precursor to, you can consider it a precursor to Chanakya Niti. So the word Niti itself means morality. So Vidura was such a moral person that, and such a great advisor that, we have this Vidura Niti also, that we can refer to. It's mainly instructions of morality. And like I said, conversations with Dhritarashtra. And actually, Vidura was Yamraj in the previous life. And so no wonder that, he was so wise, because his wisdom actually carries through. Yamraj was considered one of the Mahajans. And, the Mahajans, as we know, they are, they are exemplary, in dharma or dharmic content. So, but what happened was he was cursed by a sage, because the sage felt that Yamraj had given him excessive punishment. So he was born, in a Shudra position. And when the time had come, for coronation, Vidura actually, by Bhishma, Vidura had been recommended for his wisdom. And then Dhritarashtra had been also recommended for, different reasons, like such as strength, and Pandu for his military prowess. But Vidura actually said that, suggested that Dhritarashtra should not be the king because he was blind. And so Pandu was made the king. And exactly what happened was that Dhritarashtra, when Pandu passed away, Dhritarashtra became king, but actually Vidura was his advisor and prime minister. And he did a very good job until, of course, Duryodhan came into age, and when he was sidelined. So not only was Vidura was a very wise man, but he was also a very good friend to Dhritarashtra. So Dhritarashtra used to listen to him, his wise counsel. But the thing was, Dhritarashtra had this weakness about his son Duryodhana. And so he used to listen to Vidura, but what happened is that when his son came in the picture, he would totally just go, ignore the advice and go off on the other direction. But of course, the main point was that Vidura was very elevated personality and extremely wise. And Maitreya Muni also was very elevated, actually, very elevated kind of a sage. And in fact, in one poem, I think in this verse in Srimad Bhagavatam 3.5.17, Prabhupada in his purport also says that Maitreya Muni is described as Bhagwan because he's over there in this particular verse, because he surpassed all ordinary human beings in learning and experience. And whatever he said about this greatest welfare service of the world, it is considered authoritative. So here we see in Srimad Bhagavatam that these were the elevated personalities about whom Parikshit Maharaj was asking Sukadev Goswami. And this is mostly like a question and answer kind of a session that was going on. And Prabhupada also says that, if you want to learn anything, like human being is a rational animal, and so he's bound to make inquiries. And so even in the material world, we actually learn everything just by questioning and answering. And our caliber is judged by the type of questions that we ask. Like Sukadev, Parikshit Maharaj had only 7 days to live, but he was asking questions like we would be, very elevated level of questions, like what should I hear, what should I worship, what is my duty, those kind of things. So this is also a question and answer kind of a session. And Prabhupada actually I really like one of the quotes of Prabhupada in the Science of Self-Realization in the book. He says, an intelligent man knows that death is born along with his birth. So, the moment we are born, actually, death is also born, So it's like, we have to remember that we are one step closer to death every day. And so whatever we have to do, if we keep that in mind, then, we'll be really doing, spending our time on the right things. And if we keep that, our mortality in mind. So, of course, as for this particular verse goes, we see that this particular king, he was very anxious to understand. Prabhupada says that Parikshit Maharaj was very enthusiastic. Even this verse as well as the next verse. He was very enthusiastic to learn, and so that, what did they speak about, and, maybe I can learn from it and, benefit from it. So this actually reminded me of two verses in Nectar of Instruction that deals with, and the reason I want to go through this is because Parikshit Maharaj was a very true devotee of the Lord. And what really, in these two verses, all the symptoms of his being a pure devotee are displayed through his, questioning. So what really makes a good bhakta? Like if you go to NOI 3, that is Nectar of Instruction 3, we have this verse, Utsahan Nishchaya Dhairya Tatat Karma Pravartana Sangha Tyagat Satto Viti Sadbir Bhakti Prasiddhyati. So there are certain principles that are very favorable to bhakti, that is in the translations, it is said. One is being enthusiastic. Now, if we see being enthusiastic, part of it, Parikshit Maharaj was very enthusiastic, and we also should be. And anytime we find our enthusiasm waning, we should try to come up with some innovative ways in which we can raise the enthusiasm, or take a break and then come back again in some, but the main thing is we always need to maintain our enthusiasm in hearing and chanting and all the other activities. Then is endeavoring with confidence. That is, we have to have confidence in the process, and that can also be got through the association of devotees. Being patient, I think most of us are, I've heard like several questions in lectures that people want to know how much, and devotees want to know how much progress they're making. But the main thing is we have to be very patient, because it's more like I'm seeing like if you have a small child, and the small child goes to kindergarten, grade 1, and say you have a successful business, and in grade 2 they want to join you for successful business, but that the child is not ready, and they have to learn the lessons of grade 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, go to college, and then learn all the lessons, and then experience, and then only they can run the business with you. So the same thing, we think we are at a very high level, but actually we have to really invest, we really have to look at ourselves very carefully and know that, we have a long way to go, and lots of lessons to learn before we reach that level of pure bhakti. So we have to be patient. We just have to keep on going, and even if we make mistakes, it's okay, come back, so we have to be patient. Then acting according to regulative principles, like Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, of course, we have to keep doing that. Abandoning the associates of non-devotees, that's also because it will divert us. And then following the footsteps of the previous acharyas, because they are our teachers, and we are just like children. We don't have, we are still learning. So if these and if you see Parikshit Maharaj, he exemplified everything. He was enthusiastic in spite of having 7 days. He was confident, very confident, because he was not looking after like his property and everything else. His focus was completely here, patiently hearing everything, hearing chanting, and then he was at this point not really even looking at non-devotees, and he was following the steps of all the acharyas. So, and then I thought that, let's see what is detrimental to bhakti, which is in Nectar of Instruction, verse 2. Atyahara prayas cha prajalpo niyamagraha jana sanghas chalolyam cha sadbir bhakti vinashati. So of course there are some things which totally ruin our bhakti. One is they're detrimental, rather we can say. One is eating a lot, because that makes you really lethargic, or collecting more funds than required. Over endeavoring for mundane things that are difficult to obtain, talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters, practicing the scriptural rules and regulations for the sake of following them and not for spiritual advancement, or rejecting the rules and regulations of the scriptures and working independently or whimsically, associating with worldly minded persons who are not interested in Krishna consciousness, and being greedy for mundane advancements. So a lot over here is about mundane attachments and how not to be. It's not that we don't have to do our duty. Everybody has to do their duty. So this is not a escape that we don't do our duty, but being overly attached, that is what is wrong. And also another thing is, when I had started my Krishna consciousness, it didn't dawn to me why we should ignore or we should not associate too much with non-devotees. But the problem is, it's not, the question is, why, if you're just associating with non-devotees and say they are like interested in parties or fashion or something, then your mind gets diverted towards those things and your consciousness gets into that thing. That's why it's advised that always associate with devotees so that your consciousness gets uplifted. Another thing that I really liked over here is practicing the scriptural rules and regulations, not for the as a matter of ritual, that we have to follow them or nothing. It is for your spiritual advancement. So it should not be a matter of like a ritualistic thing that I'm just doing it for the sake of doing it. Once you find yourself in that position, it's a wrong position. So, and also I think we have more responsibility because we know the scriptures, or we are learning, I would say, but we are learners of the scriptures, that at least we are getting the knowledge. So sometimes I think it's more like, like you're driving and like I am a driver and I know that I don't have to cross the red light, but yet I cross the red light anyway. So that's wrong, right? But if I was just driving and I didn't know the rule that we don't have to cross the red light, and still I crossed the red light, at least I didn't know that there was a rule. But here I know the rule and I'm breaking it. So for us, there is more responsibility, I feel, because at least we know, we are learning some of the scriptures. And then if we don't follow them, then it puts a little bit more responsibility. So we have to act a little bit more responsibly. And like they say that with great power comes great responsibility. So at least we know a little bit, hearing from the verses. So we have to act responsibly in that respect. So if you see all these things also, Parikshit Maharaj was not doing, like, mundane matters and all that. And, he was following scriptures from very elevated personalities, really, not from ordinary. And then, so if we go to verse 2, of course, that is 3.1.4, main thing over here in this particular verse, it says that Vidura was a great devotee of the Lord, and therefore his questions to Maitreya Muni is at the highest level, that is approved by learned circles. So what happens, Prabhupada describes in his purport, like that if you have a business discussion with somebody, that will be mostly like at the business level. But Arjuna, Lord Krishna chose Arjuna for a particular reason, for Bhagavad Gita, of course, because Arjuna, he felt, was capable of understanding, as well as Arjuna was a great devotee of the Lord. That is why in Bhagavad Gita, like as it is mentioned over here, Bhagavad Gita 4.3, the Lord actually chose Arjuna because he was the fit person to which to transmit this transcendental message of the Bhagavad Gita, because he was so pure devotee of the Lord. And then, of course, Prabhupada, he discusses how Bhagavad Gita is mainly based on bhakti, and how then he goes on, between the difference between karma and the karma yoga, where he says that karma is only for enjoyment of fruit, but karma yoga, has a tinge of bhakti to it also, because you're pleasing the Lord and not merely just pleasing your senses. So these are like what Prabhupada is trying to distinguish here is that there are different levels of conversations that take place. One is very mundane type of conversation, and one is very elevated type of conversation. So I thought, we have 2 or 3 minutes more, and I thought that, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, his conversations were often at a very highly level, very elevated level. And quickly we'll go through his conversation, summary of rather. We don't have the time to go through the entire conversation with Ramanand Roy. Actually, Ramanand Roy was the governor of Madras, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu actually met him on the banks of the Godavari, and he asked that question that, what is the goal of life? They were discussing very elevated topics, and Bhagavad Dharma, what is Bhagavad Dharma and all that. So Ramananda Roy said, well, if I do my occupation very well, or the system of Varnashrama Dharma, if I follow it, then I'm very, very elevated, or I've reached the transcendental position. But the Lord said, no, Varnashrama Dharma is superficial. It does not have anything to do with highest realization. So it is only based on moral and ethical values. And so the Lord rejected it. So Ramananda Roy went further. He said that if I renounce my fruitive actions to the Lord, that is what Bhagavad Gita says, that, whatever you do, whatever you eat, just offer it to me, the Lord says. So that also was rejected by the Lord. And then Roy went further and he said, okay, what if we renounce Varnashrama Dharma and accept devotional service? The Lord rejected that also. He said, all of a sudden, you cannot renounce your position. And then Roy suggested that sincere association of self-realized soul and to hear submissively the transcendental message of the past times of the personality of Godhead, And so this was actually welcomed by the Lord. So even over here, we see that Parikshit Maharaj, that's what he's doing. He is, of course, after this, there were even more elevated discussions. You can read about it in teachings of the Lord Chaitanya book. There's a lot of very elevated discussion. But if you see, this was considered right by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And this is what in the two verses that we are discussing, this is what Parikshit Maharaj is doing, a sincere association of self-realized souls, and to hear submissively the transcendental message of the personality of Godhead from self-realized souls. So that is what was the conclusion of the discussion between Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Ramanand Roy. Though, as I said, they went to even higher levels of discussion, like worship of Radha Krishna, and went into a lot more. But at the gist of it, this was what the summary was. So just recapping again, this is just an inquiry between, these verses are just inquiries between Parikshit Maharaj and Sukadev Goswami as to what happened between Vidura and Maitreya Muni. And as well as, of course, the second verse was that since Vidura was so elevated, therefore his question, because of his caliber of his position, his questions also must have been so elevated. And that is why Parikshit Maharaj was interested in hearing regarding that subject matter. So I think pretty much, so that is what Prabhupada was trying to say, is how different levels of, that you can judge a caliber of a person by by the type of questions you ask. And what are the right types of questions to ask? That is what is being shared, in the purport here. So that's all I have. If anyone has any comments or any questions or anything, please feel free to go ahead.
There is a comment from Kalpatara Mataji in the chat, Mataji. Very nice class.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you, Mataji. Yeah. Any other realizations or sharings or?
Hare Krishna Mataji, Dandvat Pranam. So the translation says very strong that Vidura was a pure devotee. Of course, he is a Mahajan, and he asked the right questions to Maitreya.
Yes. Yes, Prabhu.
So I was thinking, we are reading Srimad Bhagavatam. So it is highlighting us that when we have to become, first of all, a devotee and then ask the right question. So in our aspects, we are not pure devotees yet, but we do a lot of inquiries, and even the questions may not be up to the standard of what we're asking. So
Yes,
how do we go about on this? Any comments and kind of a more churning on this?
yes. Yeah. So Prabhu, even though we are not pure devotees, we are still trying to ask questions about spiritual topics, and like Prabhupada actually in his book in the Science of Self-Realization, he says is that you have to make inquiries, because the greater the number of questions, the greater the advancement of knowledge. And of course, our questions may not be like as perfect as Vidura, but if we don't ask questions, then we don't learn. So questions we have to ask, Prabhu, but it may not be at the same caliber of Vidura, as you said. But that shouldn't stop us from, clearing our doubts. It's just like a child, like I said, has to go through several grades in order to reach the highest grades. Now he has to learn by asking questions in a way. So that's what my realization is, Prabhu.
Yeah, because if you look at Srila Prabhupada, he had written one book by name Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers.
Yes, Prabhu, that's very good. Yes.
Yeah, so there are perfect questions and perfect answers. That means it makes sense that at point of time, but what Prabhupada had was being asked and what he answered. But for now, of course, our spiritual masters are compassionate. They know that where we are, and accordingly they'll answer. But for spiritual master, I have seen even His Holiness Rompad Maharaj, even a small child asked a question, he takes very seriously. And then he jokes a little bit 1 minute, and then he takes that very seriously and answers question to the way he answers the elders. So that's what, that's some reflections on that. Maybe, whether we are qualified, not qualified, but the spiritual master takes it very seriously and answers that question. And in fact, if he is not able to answer, even he said, okay, I'll get back to you, and then he'll still answer that question. So that means he's taking it very, very seriously. Yes, so what I would say, my reflection was, my God, whether it is a, dummy question or not, whatever that question, still ask that question. At least otherwise we will never progress. That means even in my life, I never used to ask question. I just listen and listen. Okay. Somebody will ask, let me listen. But how do I even ask a question? It's another question. What to ask a question? So that was I was thinking, oh my God, there are so many people asking so many questions. I don't ask questions at all. What do I ask question? So then they realized, the more you learn, the more you get doubts. If you don't learn or read, then you don't even get doubts.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
So we have to hear more and more, then only we'll get doubts. So that's the context I was thinking to bring up. Thank you, Mathaji, for your
thank you, Prabhu, for you're excellent. Sometimes we learn from other people's questions also, like if you ask a question and I'm hearing, I can also learn, or if I'm asking a question, then you can also learn.
That is true. That was my initial thoughts. And then I used to do the same thing again. And I learned. It's not that we did not learn. Yes, but how do I ask a question? They say it is, Sadviti Pranipatena Pariprashnana Seveya. So, oh my God, I don't even ask a question. Even my Guru Maharaj is not even here. Maybe once in, I don't know when I can meet him. I don't know. I can't even send an email. Even if I send an email, how long it takes to get an answer. That's okay. Yes. But what I mean to say is, if we don't inquire, there is no question, there is no answer, because that means there is no doubts. We are completely perfect.
Yes, Prabhu.
We are not perfect.
Yes, so, Prabhu.
A little bit churning on this, Mathaji. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Prabhu. Very good observation. Yeah. Anybody else?
Hare Krishna Mataji, this is HG Saragrahi. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Guru Maharaj and Srila Prabhupada.
Hare
Very
Krishna.
great, very wonderful class, Mataji. I was able to appreciate the purity of Vitura, taking a deeper shelter with Maitreya Maharishi. That's very inspiring.
Thank you, Prabhu. Yeah.
My thoughts are going to Balaram Prasad Prabhu's realization. That's very true. Prabhu, like asking question itself is a bigger process.
Yes.
It's like I used to wonder how devotees are asking a wonderful question, just not for the sake of asking question, but really a question that pleases the spiritual masters, or that itself is a bigger process. It comes with learned experience, Prabhu. It's not like every one of us ask some questions, and then it gets mature as we observe others, as we shadow others, and it's a process, because the term that what I'm using is all the material term, but it is definitely like when we follow or when we shadow others who are asking the right questions, our thought process, our thinking capability on the subject matter also improves. That's my realization. And also the other thing, Srila Prabhupada also said, if you a fool cannot be revealed unless he opens his mouth. So that's another way to also stay on the other side. Thank you very much, Mataji. Thank you.
That's why we don't open the mouth.
Yes, Prabhu.
Yes, Prabhu. Sometimes, yeah, you have to think of a good question, but sometimes it's okay to ask if you have a doubt. But yeah, that's so. There's always the consideration what you're saying, also, Prabhu. But if you have a doubt, then one can ask. But
yeah,
There is another thing, Mataji.
Yes.
Prabhu, both of you. What if I ask a question? Oh my God, I'm actually following many years in ISKCON. Oh, Krishna conscious. What if I ask a question? What other people will think about me? So
yeah, that's always there, Prabhu, in any social setting, right? That consideration is always there. That but like we have to learn, like as Sachi Sutta Prabhu was saying, by observing others a little bit, and getting to the point where we also get to ask questions. So it's a learning experience, Prabhu. It's just a learning experience for us.
Yeah. I was very much embarrassed, Prabhu, when I moved to Boston. The questions are very high standards. Like I was not even able to understand what they are asking it. It's all MIT questions, like the though you call the people like a college students questions, but it's not a college students question. Mara said it's a typical college students question, but it is. The rational thinking is so advanced, and there's a lot of a connectivity why they ask that question. Like it's if when others are looking at, we also get popular, Prabhu, in a good sense or in a mundane sense. So there's nothing wrong to ask a question like what Mataji is saying about it. Yeah, I asked so many questions to you, Prabhu, when I attended the Bhakti Viksha, and you asked the person like you told me you should ask questions. Then I got inspired and asked all questions under the sky like Vasa Puja.
Yes, Prabhu.
But still, I don't want to show off myself that I don't know.
Yeah, Prabhu, that is natural. That is human tendency, right? It's a normal thing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
No, but whether you do show off or not show off, Guru knows that what we are.
Yes, that is true. They are more elevated than us. They can, look at us and understand what's going on. Yeah.
Yes, Mataji. Thank you, Prabhus. Thank you.
Okay.
Very
Okay.
Hare Krishna, I must say I enjoyed the discussion part very much. I was kind of late in the class, but discussion is always very interesting, very, very important. I have always, sometimes thought because of shortage of time, I would just listen to the lecture and get out of this, listening to this audio. Then I understand so much from the question answer, my question. That is very enlightening, actually,
Yeah.
So anyway, very much fun listening to you all. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Yes, that the love question answer is very useful actually. Like I said, even other people asking questions, you learn from them. So yeah, right, Sandhya Mataji. Thank you. Anybody else, or we're done? Or okay, I think okay, then I think since there are no more questions right now, thank you all for attending, and Hare Krishna.
Thank you.